They told you to save money. They told you to work hard, earn a paycheck, and trust the bank. They told you the system was fair, that inflation was natural, that your government had everything under control. They lied. There are laws of money, deep, ancient, brutal laws that govern every currency, every empire, every economic system that has ever existed. These laws don't care about your politicians' promises. They don't care about central bank announcements or economic theories or hope. They are as fixed as gravity, as predictable as the tides. And they've been destroying ordinary people's wealth for thousands of years, while enriching a small few who understand how the game actually works. Tonight, you're going to learn what they don't teach in schools. From Rome's debased coins to today's digital money printing, from medieval Europe to modern America, the same patterns repeat, the same laws operate, the same people win and the same people lose. Every empire thinks it's invented a new kind of money, and every empire eventually learns it hasn't, because money follows rules that don't bend, don't break, and don't forgive ignorance. If you don't know these laws, you'll spend your whole life wondering why you feel robbed, but can never see the thief. Let's pull back the curtain and show you exactly how the system was rigged from the very beginning. We start with the oldest trick in the book, and it has a name, Gresham's Law. In the 1500s, Sir Thomas Gresham explained it to Queen Elizabeth I with brutal simplicity. Bad money drives out good. Here's how it works. Imagine two types of coins circulating in an economy at the same time. One is pure silver, trusted and valuable. The other has been debased, mixed with cheap metals, shaved down, diluted by a desperate government trying to stretch its money supply. Officially, both coins are supposed to be worth the same, but everyone knows they're not. So what do people do? They spend the bad coin and hoard the good one. You pay your taxes with the junk. You settle debts with the fake, but the real silver? That gets hidden away, melted down, or shipped abroad where it's valued properly. The bad money floods the marketplace while the good money vanishes from circulation. This isn't theory. This is history on repeat. In ancient Rome, emperors facing endless wars and corruption began debasing the silver denarius. What started as nearly pure silver was gradually cut with copper, tin, and bronze, until it was barely more than base metal with a silver wash. And Roman citizens weren't stupid. They spent the debased coins immediately and hoarded the old, pure ones. The government kept printing worse and worse currency, and the good money kept disappearing. Trust eroded. Inflation spiraled. The economy fractured. The same pattern played out in medieval Europe. Kings would clip the edges off gold and silver coins, melting down the shavings to mint more currency. They'd replace precious metals with cheaper alloys and declare the new coins equal in value to the old. And every time the population adapted. Spend the garbage, save the gold. Pay with the fake, protect the real. Gresham's Law reveals something brutal about human nature and money. People aren't fools. When governments cheat, citizens learn to cheat back. And once that cycle begins, trust in the currency unravels piece by piece until there's nothing left but paper promises no one believes. But here's where it gets darker. There's a second law, almost like the evil twin of the first. Gresham's Law describes the slow rot of currency. But what happens when the system doesn't just decay, when it collapses entirely? That's where Thiers' Law takes over. Named after Adolphe Thiers, a 19th century French politician, it says that in moments of true crisis, the logic flips. In collapse, good money drives out bad. Picture Weimar Germany in 1923. Hyperinflation has turned the mark into confetti. Prices double every few days. A loaf of bread costs billions. Workers get paid twice a day because their morning wages are worthless by evening. In that environment, no one wants to hold marks for even a second. The moment you receive payment, you sprint to spend it before it loses more value. Or better yet, you trade it for anything real, dollars, gold, cigarettes, food, anything that isn't disintegrating by the hour. The bad money doesn't drive out the good anymore. The bad money gets abandoned. People flee into sound assets. Thiers' Law is the moment when the entire population gives up on the government's currency, and the system collapses into barter, black markets, and foreign money. We've seen this in Zimbabwe in the 2000s, where inflation reached 89.7 sextillion %, and people stopped using Zimbabwean dollars entirely. trading in U.S. currency instead. We've seen it in Venezuela in the 2010s, where the bolivar became so worthless that merchants weighed cash instead of counting it, and families survived only through remittances sent from abroad. We've seen it in Lebanon in 2019, when banks froze accounts and the pound lost over 90% of its value almost overnight. Thier's law is the death rattle of money. Gresham describes the disease. Thiers describes the funeral. And between those two laws, every currency that has ever existed lives and dies. But even before total collapse, there's another law at work, one that explains why inflation always feels like theft. Richard Cantillon was an Irish-French economist in the early 1700s, and he noticed something that should enrage you. When new money enters the economy, it doesn't reach everyone at the same time. It flows through the system unevenly, enriching those closest to the source first, and impoverishing everyone else by the time it trickles down. This is called the Cantillon effect, and it's the hidden mechanism that rigs the modern financial system against ordinary people. Here's how it works. Imagine a government prints $1 trillion. Where does that money go first? To the banks, to Wall Street, to government contractors and politically connected corporations. These early recipients spend that fresh money before prices have adjusted. They buy assets, stocks, real estate businesses, at yesterday's prices. They lock in value while the money is still new and powerful. Then slowly, that money filters down. It reaches small businesses, then workers, then consumers. But by the time it gets to you, prices have already risen. The grocery bill is higher, rent is up, gas costs more. You're earning the same salary, but everything costs more because the people at the top of the money chain already spent the new money and drove up demand. The result? Inflation isn't just rising prices. It's a transfer of wealth from the bottom to the top, disguised as economic policy. Look at 2008. The Federal Reserve launched quantitative easing, trillions of dollars pumped into the financial system to save the economy. And it worked. Few owned stocks. The S&P 500 tripled over the next decade. Real estate prices soared. Billionaires got richer. But wages? Stagnant. Main Street? Hollowed out. The Cantillon effect in action. Look at 2020. Governments worldwide printed unprecedented amounts of money in response to the pandemic. Stock markets hit record highs. Housing became unaffordable. Inflation spiked. And while the wealthy bought assets with cheap borrowed money, ordinary workers watched their savings lose value and their cost of living explode. This isn't an accident. This is the system working exactly as designed. The Cantillon effect guarantees that every round of money printing enriches those closest to the money printer and punishes everyone else. You're not imagining it. You are being robbed, and the weapon is inflation, but the robbery doesn't stop there. Governments have another, quieter way to steal your wealth. After World War II, nations across the world faced a problem. Mountains of debt and no clear way to pay it off. Raising taxes would spark riots. Defaulting would destroy credibility. So governments found a third option, one that's almost invisible: financial repression. Here's the playbook. Central banks push interest rates far below the rate of inflation. Your savings account pays 1% interest, but inflation is running at 5%. That means every year, your money loses 4% of its purchasing power. You're earning negative real returns, and there's nothing you can do about it because capital controls and regulations make it difficult to move your money abroad or into alternative assets. Meanwhile, the government is paying off its debt with money that's losing value every year. Inflation erodes the real cost of their borrowing, and they get to quietly reduce their debt burden on your back. It's a silent tax, one that never appears on a ballot, never gets debated in Congress, and never makes headlines. But it drains trillions from savers over time. This happened throughout the 1950s and 60s in the United States and Europe. Interest rates were kept artificially low, while inflation ate away at savings. And it's happening again right now. From 2008 to 2021, interest rates sat near zero for over a decade. Savers lost trillions in real wealth while asset prices, stocks, real estate, soared for those who already owned them. The COVID era turbocharged this. Rates collapsed again. Inflation spiked. Housing became unaffordable. Groceries doubled in cost, and ordinary people stuck in cash and savings accounts watched their wealth evaporate while the rich bought assets on borrowed money at 0% interest. Financial repression is the quietest form of theft. Most people never even realize it's happening. They just feel poorer every year and can't figure out why. Now you know. The system is designed to trap you in devaluing currency, while your purchasing power is drained away to pay for government debt. But the laws get even darker when we zoom out to the level of entire empires. In 1960, a Belgian-American economist named Robert Triffin testified before the U.S. Congress with a warning that should have shaken the world. He explained that the Bretton Woods system, where the U.S. dollar was the global reserve currency, contained a fatal flaw, a paradox that would eventually destroy it. Here's the paradox. If the world needs dollars to conduct trade, then America has to supply those dollars. That means running trade deficits, spending more abroad than it earns, so the rest of the world has enough liquidity to function. In the short term, this is great. The dollar is trusted, global commerce expands, and America enjoys enormous power and privilege. But in the long term, it's a death sentence. The more dollars America exports, the weaker the link to gold becomes. The more debt piles up, the more fragile trust in the system grows. Eventually, the math doesn't work. Foreign nations start doubting whether America can back all those dollars, and the reserve currency collapses. Triffin's warning came true in 1971, when President Richard Nixon ended the gold standard and turned the dollar into pure fiat money, backed by nothing but trust. Since then, America has run chronic trade deficits for over 50 years. It exports dollars and imports goods. Factories have left. Debt has exploded to over $30 trillion. But the dollar's dominance has kept the game alive because the world still needs it for oil. Trade and reserves. The paradox is brutal. To remain the world's reserve currency, America must hollow out its own economy. It must sacrifice production for consumption, savings for debt, and long-term health for short-term power. And now, the cracks are showing. China, Russia, and the BRICS nations are building alternative systems. Central banks are buying gold at the fastest pace in 50 years. The dollar's dominance, once unshakable, now looks fragile. Triffin's paradox guarantees that every reserve currency eventually destroys itself. The crown becomes the curse. But even if you understand these massive structural laws, there's still a law that explains why every attempt to fix the system just makes it worse. In the 1970s, British economist Charles Goodhart observed something deceptively simple, but devastatingly true. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. Governments and central banks love metrics. Inflation at 2%, unemployment at 5%, GDP growth at 3%. These numbers are supposed to describe reality, but once politicians decide they must hit those targets at all costs, they stop measuring the truth and start manipulating the system. Take inflation targeting. For decades, central banks promised to keep inflation around 2%. Sounds reasonable. Sounds stable. But to hit that number, they distorted interest rates, pumped liquidity into markets, and inflated asset bubbles. Official inflation stayed low on paper, but housing costs, healthcare, and education exploded far beyond 2%. The metric said stable. Real life screamed unaffordable. Or take GDP. Politicians worship GDP growth as the measure of national success. But once growth itself became the goal, governments did anything to keep the number rising. They piled on debt. They outsourced industries. They inflated financial bubbles. The result? An illusion of prosperity built on a foundation of fragility. Goodhart's law reveals the trap. When you manage the numbers instead of the reality, you distort everything. The metrics become lies. The system becomes a game of appearance over truth, and the people living inside that system suffer the consequences while being told everything is fine. This is why every economic report feels disconnected from your actual life. The government says inflation is 3%, but your rent went up 20%. They say unemployment is low, but no one can afford a house. They say the economy is strong, but you're working 2 jobs just to survive. Goodhart's law explains why. The targets are fake, the measures are gamed, and you're living in the gap between the numbers and the truth. But there's one final law, the arithmetic endgame that every empire eventually faces. This law doesn't have a famous economist's name attached to it. It's just brutal math. In the early stages of development, debt is powerful. Borrow $1, invest it wisely, and you might get $2 of economic growth. Debt fuels expansion, builds infrastructure, creates prosperity. But over time, as debt piles higher and higher, the returns shrink. $1 of new borrowing might produce only 50 cents of growth, then 25 cents, then nothing. Eventually, you're borrowing just to pay interest on old debt. The machine doesn't accelerate anymore. It groans under its own weight. We are living in that stage right now. The United States has over $34 trillion in debt. Each new round of borrowing produces less real growth and more financial engineering. Instead of building factories or improving productivity, debt props up stock markets, funds entitlements, and keeps the illusion of prosperity alive for another quarter. But the math is merciless. Debt saturation is the end game every empire reaches. Rome debased its currency when expansion slowed. The French monarchy borrowed itself into revolution. The British Empire strained under debts after 2 world wars. And now America, like every empire before it, faces the same reckoning. The law of diminishing returns on debt is the final countdown. Borrowing buys time, but it doesn't buy escape. And when the weight becomes too much, the system doesn't bend. It breaks. So what do these laws teach us when we step back and see the full picture? That money isn't magic. It's not mysterious. It's governed by rules as hard and unforgiving as gravity. Bad money pushes out good until the system collapses. In crisis, good money drives out bad. New money enriches the few before it impoverishes the many. Governments repress savers to quietly erase debt. Reserve currencies hollow out the empires that issue them. Metrics become targets and truth becomes fiction. And debt in the end consumes everything. These aren't abstract ideas. They're survival codes. They explain why your savings lose value while Wall Street hits record highs. Why wages stagnate while asset prices soar. Why inflation feels like theft, because it is. Why you work harder every year but fall further behind. These aren't accidents. They're not mysteries. They are the rhythm of financial history, playing out in front of you right now. And here's the hardest truth of all. The game was never designed for you to win. Ordinary citizens live under transparency. Elites live under secrecy. You file taxes. They shift assets offshore. You earn wages. They receive new money first. You hold cash that loses value. They hold assets that rise with inflation. The system obeys its own laws, and unless you learn them, you will always play blind. But knowledge is power. Now you know the rules. You know why money fails. You know who benefits and who loses. You know the laws that govern every currency, every empire, every financial system that has ever existed. History doesn't repeat, but money obeys laws. And if you don't understand them, they will crush you all the same. If this opened your eyes, hit subscribe. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look.